Well, it's 2:30. I see that everyone is getting out of their offices and classrooms and joining us. I see the numbers going up quickly, and we are going to get started. And can you believe it's September 12th, 2023, with Module 3 of the Equity Assistance Center South at the Southern Education Foundation's third module, with our title, How Schools Can Make Discipline More Equitable. And so we'll hear from our experts, Tom Monk, and we have stories from the field from the Southern states, which you'll love hearing that application of the research in practice. So we are going to get started. My name is Donna Elam. I serve as a senior advisor for the EXL at SEF. And let's start. Go to the next slide. And as we're in this session, we hope that the beginning of your school year is going really great. So let's talk a little bit about who the EX South at SEF is. The EX South is one of the 4 federally funded regional centers across the nation, providing tailored support to address issues of equity. The director of EX South is Attorney Ishay Collins, and the EX South supports the 11 states and the District of Columbia. You can see that on the screen, the states and where most of you belong. We do have visitors from the nation that are participating in this session, so welcome as well. Next slide, please. So let's talk about this journey to excellence and equity in this collaborative. So all of us as educators, we know and value that high quality education for all students is important. But as we're looking at our work, we have to be intentional. We have to be intentional about our focus. We have to know what to measure, what to monitor, and how to support those efforts. And this series is based on the consensus study report by the National Academies of Science on monitoring educational equity indicators that have 7 domains and 16 equity indicators. This webinar is part of that series for EX South at SEF to support practitioners to address disparities in educational attainment. If you can go to the next slide, please. So for this session, equitable access to supportive school and classroom environments, it's under domain 2. And to measure, we are looking at disparities in access to opportunities and resources. So disparities in access to supportive school and classroom environments are measured by out-of-school suspensions and expulsions. You can go to the next.
Thank you, Michelle. Yours.
So if you can all mute your mics, because so that we can get ready to hear from the fabulous Dr. Tom Monk. But let me just first tell you a little bit about Dr. Monk. As you can see under the title, he is a disproportionality and equity technical assistance specialist. But Tom is a principal research associate at WestAt with 38 years of experience in education research and evaluation, special education, technical assistance, product development, and mathematics education, always with an emphasis on equity. For 10 years, on behalf of the Office of Special Education Programs, OSEP, Dr. Monk has delivered presentations, helped create online tools, which you'll hear about today, and provided direct technical assistance to states as they meet federal requirements to identify district-level racial or ethnic disproportionality in the identification, placement, and disciplining of special education students. As a next step, He has trained dozens of districts in several states in the Success Gaps process, leading them through a data-based, inclusive, team-based process to find the root causes of these disproportionalities in general education and in school relations with the families and the communities affected by in these student groups. Tom, I'm going to pass the mic to you.
Thank you so much, Donna. I want to add or just focus a little bit on that. The 38 years of experience, 10 of those years were as a teacher in alternative schools. And I really wish that when I was a teacher, that I had known a lot of the things I'm going to tell you about, because I could have referred fewer students to the principal's office, leading to fewer suspensions. And I could have improved the outcomes, improved the classroom environment in my classrooms, and improved the outcomes. And another thing that I really didn't know when I was a teacher was very much about special education. To me, it's kind of amazing that in an alternative school, we really weren't given much experience with what special education knows and does. So I want to talk about some of the things that we can learn from special education to suspend less and improve outcomes. And this talk is largely based on OSEP's Discipline and Behavior blog series by the new director, Valerie Williams of OSEP. I highly recommend this blog to you. So move on to there's the blog series. Next slide, please. What do we know? One thing we know is that the way to improve school behavior is not suspension. It's not the best way. There are better ways. In particular, something called positive behavioral interventions and supports. I hope you all know about this already, but I certainly can tell you that that in the large majority of the schools in our country, it could be implemented better. It's required by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, but implementation really varies widely. We know that when it's implemented well, it can result in, first bullet, improved outcomes, such as increased academic achievement, increased social and emotional competence for children with disabilities, reduced bullying, reduced inappropriate behavior, next bullet, reduced use of exclusionary discipline, including reduced discipline referrals and suspensions, next bullet, reduced use of restraint and seclusion. Next slide, please. You may be wondering now, what is PBIS? And I wish I could really have another hour to really describe everything there is to describe about it. But I'm just going to leave you with this graphic and this link. And I hope that many of you after this call will go to pbis.org, the experts in this field, a center funded by the Office of Special Education Programs. But what you can just see from the graphic is it's a way to change the behavior of teachers and administrators to reorganize the system of a school, a way to change practices, a way using data, improving outcomes, and always focusing on equity. That's all I'm going to be able to say about it today, but I sure hope you'll research more. Next slide, please. What else do we know about suspension? Well, there's the obvious thing. When you suspend a student, you have suspended the opportunity that student has to learn in the classroom with his or her peers. And we know that in 2017-18, 11,205,797 school days were lost to out-of-school suspensions. Next slide, please. What else do we know? We know that students with disabilities are over-suspended. And these two graphs show that. In preschool, 23% of the students enrolled in preschool are students with disabilities, but 57% of the students suspended from preschool are students with disabilities. School-age students, 13% of them are students with disabilities, but 25% of them, 25% of those suspended out of school are students with disabilities. Students with disabilities are over-suspended. Next slide. This is a risk ratio table, and it's something I've been working on and developing over the last couple of years. And it's based on some of the work that I've done for the Office of Special Education Programs in the field of significant disproportionality. The regulation requires that SEAs make 98 calculations for every local educational agency or school district in their state. And what they're calculating is risk ratios. And to sort of illustrate that, I'm just going to use this table, which has the not 98, but all the discipline risk ratios that are required for the whole country, not for any particular LEA. And also I've added color, which emphasizes the higher numbers. And so as you're looking at this chart, I suspect most of your eyes have been drawn to that middle column, which is red as red can be. And that column is headed Black or African American students. What this table shows is that nationally in 2021, looking at that first number, 1.54, that says that Black or African American students were 54% more likely than other students with disabilities, just focusing on students with disabilities, to be in school suspended for 10 days or less. Next row is 92% more likely to be in school suspended for more than 10 days. 77% more likely to be out of school suspended for 10 days or less. 60% more likely to be out of school suspended for more than 10 days. And Black or African American students receive 68% more disciplinary removals than other groups of students. This is just one use of a risk ratio table, and I have a format to create these, so I'd be glad to have folks reach out to hear more about how to use these to really focus your work and understand where you need to work. Next slide. We're going to be moving now. We've learned admired the problem. We learned what the problems are, and now it's time to look at some possible solutions. And at my part, I'm going to be talking about what the Office of Special Education Programs has to share in that regard. But you all see here, we've got a Mentimeter, and you all know how to take a photo of the QR code with your phone, or go to menti.com and put in the code, or in the link, you'll find a link to the Mentimeter. And that's the place where we would love to hear what you are hearing that makes sense to you, that you'd really like to consider trying where you are. What are your key takeaways? What are the strategies that are resonating with you? Just give you a couple of seconds to get to Menti before this goes away. All right, let's move ahead. Let's start talking about solutions. Valerie Williams, the director of OSEP, in her blog series recommends 5 actions to reduce exclusionary discipline. The first is adopting a prevention mindset. The second, I'm not going to read the 5 here because I'm going to go through them slide by slide. So those are the 5. Let's go to the first one. Adopting a prevention mindset. The key thing that we understand here is that behavior is a form of communication. So to quote Valerie Williams, when schools and early childhood programs prioritize understanding why a child behaves in a certain way, root causes can be addressed and work can be done to prevent or mitigate future challenges. And the good news is that we can learn to analyze the situation to figure out why a student is behaving a certain way. I wish I had had this training before I was a teacher, because once we can really engage with that student and figure out why that student is behaving a certain way, we can engage in effective methods to address the situation and teach the student more appropriate behaviors. Next slide. The second thing that we encourage from the Office of Special Education Programs is examining data. There are, I guess I want to say, this is an awful lot of what I have focused on. I have done a lot of my work for an OSEP-funded center called the IDEA Data Center. It's a data center, and the idea is we can look at the data to, one, figure out what are the significant disproportionalities, that's those risk ratios. Right?
Hell no.
Can we ask folks to mute if
Mute
they're...
your mics, please.
So we're examining data to find the significant disproportionalities. We're examining data to figure out the root causes of those significant disproportionalities. In other words, where is it happening? Why is it happening? Et cetera, et cetera. We have 2 links from the Office of Special Education Programs here and 1 link from the IDEA Data Center, the Data Meeting Toolkit, that can all provide a lot of help as you do this work. And I want to tell a story from some of the kind of work that I've done actually in a few districts. When districts are over suspending their Black students, the first thing I do, and this is just one little piece of how to use data, is ask them to give me a list of their schools, every school in the district, and just tell me how many Black students with disabilities were out of school suspended for more than 10 days in each of those schools. And whichever those schools is out of school suspending the most Black students with disabilities, those are the schools that need the support. Those are the schools that need the attention. Those are the schools that need the resources. And it's not necessarily because those schools are doing a worse job than other schools, because sadly, in our nation, there's still a lot of districts that are very segregated, where really there's just a few schools that have the Black students. And so if we could bring the best practices in disciplinary behavior to those schools, we would really reduce these disproportionalities that we see. Next slide. We need to create systems and support those systems. There's a resource guide here again from OSEP. That link I recommend you go to it because it's a link to other links, actually. You can find some things that'll really help you create those systems. One system I've already mentioned and talked about is school-wide positive behavior intervention supports. It's not the last time I'll mention it. That's so key to really doing this work well. But I want to emphasize a little bit another center funded by OSEP. That's the State Implementation and Scaling of Evidence-Based Practices, SISEP. SISEP is expert in implementation science. And if you haven't heard of implementation science, you need to, because what we're trying to do here, what we need to do here is change the way that teachers and administrators approach their jobs, the way they do what they do. To change professional behavior is not easy. You can know what to do, but how do you get professionals to make those changes? That is the science of implementation science. It's been studied. We know what works, but you have to do it. And SISEP can help you do it. So that's a resource that I hope you'll take a look at as well. Next slide. And as we do this work, we want to implement strategies that are based on evidence. And there's a link there, again, from OSEP, Positive Proactive Approaches to Supporting Children with Disabilities, a guide for stakeholders. I'm just going to highlight one of the evidence-based practices, really a central one, called Multi-Tiered Systems of Support, or MTSS. Next slide, please. This is a graphic. There are many graphics of the MTSS system. This one happens to be from Henderson, North Carolina, my home state. And this one emphasizes that MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support, focus on social emotional, they focus on behavior, they focus on academics. We have an evaluate, define, analyze, implement cycle, always improving. And in the middle is that's sort of the central graphic for MTSS. It's the pyramid model you may have heard it mentioned. That's sort of a pyramid because down at the bottom in the green, it shows differentiated core. And that means every student in the school is getting a high quality academic education, high quality support for their social and emotional development and growth. And most centrally to what we're talking about is high quality instruction about what kind of behavior we want to encourage. That's tier 1. Tier 2 is targeted support, and maybe 15% of the students get this. The 15% of the students that are having some difficulty with behavior, say, they get a separate level of somewhat more intensive targeted supports. I'll tell you more about what those might look like. Third is the intensive level. That's maybe 5% of your students who are really struggling with behavior and need even more intensive supports. Again, I'll tell you more about that in the next slide. Next slide. Multi-tiered systems of support. At the universal level, we want to make sure that all students are getting high quality instruction. And it's universal design for learning is a whole field of study, very important. And it's what it boils down to is we need to make sure that in our instruction, we provide multiple means of engagement in representation, action, and expression, ways for every student to get involved in that learning. The UDL guidelines will go to your chat. We've already talked about SWPBIS as a universal intervention. Now I want to talk about that 15% of kids, a targeted intervention called restorative practices. Next slide, please. This is a tale of two schools. I hope you'll take the time to look at it, but it's all about an example of a student named Carlos who had a heated argument with his parents before he left for school one morning. So he went to school in bad shape and he was running late. His life can be transformed depending upon what kind of school he goes to. Because in a zero tolerance school, he's going to be greeted by metal detectors and a police search. In a restorative practices school, he's going to be greeted by teachers and administrators welcoming him and all the students. In the zero tolerance school, when he's late to first period, his teacher is going to call him out in front of the class. He's going to talk back and get attention. In the restorative practices school, his teacher is going to wait until class is over to talk with him to learn more about what's going on. There's the listening and setting up a meeting with his school counselor. He gets into a little altercation in the cafeteria at lunchtime. In the zero tolerance school, he's going to be detained by a police officer and he and the other student are going to be arrested. In the restorative practices-based school, student peer mediators instead of police are going to be involved. Support staff as well. They're going to hear the students sit down together. They're going to de-escalate the situation. That is so key. Finally, later that afternoon, in the zero tolerance system, he is in jail. He's in detention. He has an arrest record. He's facing suspension. In the restorative practice system, he and the other student are cleaning the cafeteria and meeting with a counselor and his parents to resolve the conflict. All the difference in the world, targeted interventions for that 15% of students. Next slide. The intensive interventions, there's functional behavior assessments and behavior improvement plans required by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Sadly, it's not always implemented well, I'm sad to say, in special education, but it should be. It's important to make sure that it is, that we find out why students are doing what they're doing. For example, if they are acting out, it might be because they want to be suspended from school. So suspension is the last thing that's going to help them change that behavior. But when we find out what they're doing and create a plan and implement that plan and check the plan, we can really make a difference for students at the intensive level. Next slide. The fifth element that Valerie Williams recommends is accessing OSET technical assistance resources. I've already showed you about 10 of them. There's more available for you. So I recommend you absolutely access those resources, and we learn from special education and do some things to really change the way we deal with students. Next slide. We've already presented the Mentimeter, so here it is again, an opportunity again to reminding you to share key takeaways or strategies that resonate with you as we move forward through our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. That was excellent. And as you're getting this is what you're going to grab your notes, because remember, you get this recording later. So all of the takeaways are going to be important for you to see. Let's talk about our first story from the South with Dr. Cindy Corcoran, the Assistant Superintendent in Rockingham County Schools in North Carolina. So Dr. Corcoran, she has been in education for the past 38 years as a teacher, school level administrator, and now a district level leader. Just let me give you a little background overview of the district. The demographics of 23 schools, 14 elementary schools, 4 middle schools, 4 traditional high schools, 1 early college high school, and 1 alternative school, 10 preschool classrooms, and 11 Head Start classrooms. They have 11,186 students. They are Tier 1 county, and this 2023-24 school year, all of their schools are Title I except for 3. Rockingham has the demographics of 58.6% white students, 19.3% Black students, 0.5% Asian Pacific Islander, 15% Hispanic and Latin students, and 0.1 American Indian or Alaskan Native, and a 0.1 Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islanders, with 6.4% are 2 or more races. 49% are female and 51% are male. But let's hear a little bit more about the school, and we are going to look at this short video. Remember, pull out any of the strategies that you hear.
Hi, everybody. So in about 2011 and 12, I was currently serving as the Title I elementary ed director for my school district. And my superintendent walked down the hallway and he said, "Would you be interested in being the EC director?" Now, I'd been an EC teacher, but certainly not the director of an entire school district as far as the EC population is concerned. And so, that's a big job, probably one of the biggest jobs, I think, within the school district. And so it took me a little bit of time to get myself wrapped around that. I say all that just because understand that I was a newbie. But long story short, comes the next spring, and I muddled through. I felt pretty well. I built my staff, I built my teams, but in the spring, I received a notice from the state of North Carolina, and basically it was from DPI, and it said that Rockingham County was found to be on a warning list for disproportionality. Second year into this job, received another warning. And so I'm looking at it again and I'm realizing, oh my gosh, it tells us that we're going to be on this warning list another year. And if we are on that warning list for a third year in the row, then we could lose our federal funding, and that we would have to do some corrective action. So we did this deeper dive of data. We found that our discipline was disproportionate, not only with our African-American males, which was where we initially landed on that list, but it was also disproportionate for our African-American females. So I created a discipline task force, which included teachers, principals, district office staff, etc. And we began to really look at the data. So as we looked at the data, we began to put together profiles of each school. So that fall, when we brought all of our principals back together for our retreat, I did a special session with all of our staff, in which I basically pulled out notebooks, and everyone got their notebook, and that data showed them what populations of students in their schools were at risk. We explained what a risk ratio and a risk index was. We explained what they needed to look for when they saw their data. And then we asked them to problem solve in small groups around and have conversations around their data. And so that is presented. We also presented at that time all of the data across the district to show them that it wasn't just one school problem, it was a full school district problem, and that we needed to really consider our actions as we moved along. Around about the same time, we also identified about 8 of our schools that we really saw that their disproportionality was really significant. And so what we did was we asked for someone from DPI to come. Laura Winters was her name, and she came from DPI and did cultural response training for those particular schools. And so what happened was those schools sent sort of train the trainer teams, and we met with them for the entire year. And basically every time that she came and trained, then they would go back to the school and they would deliver the same kind of information and data and tasks. And then they would come back and we would problem solve around some things and then talk about some of the action steps that we wanted to follow through with. About that time, we also began to talk about equity, and you can imagine, I mean, you cannot talk about disproportionality without talking about equity. We went to an outside source, and we went to a company or a group, an organization, and we asked them to do the professional development for us. we were also a pilot for MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support. And there were 3 school districts in our entire state that were requested to be a part of this MTSS. And we were one of those. We piloted across our school district that first year 5. And so we worked with 5 elementary schools and worked with their discipline data, their academic information as well. So lots is going on, right? Lot of things going on, a lot of moving parts. We were supposed to go out to schools, and principals were going to lead equity training around racial equity with our teachers. Now, had we known that maybe there would have been as much pushback about that, we probably would have taken a couple of different steps. So I'm going to tell you, there is a really big step between what an administrator is willing to have a conversation about and maybe what a teacher sees, and what they think when all of this is happening at the district level, and then it begins to filter down into the school and the classroom level. And what we heard a lot from all of our teachers was that we love them. Why would you think that we had any racial biases of any kind? We love all of our students, and we did believe that we believe them. We do believe that our teachers love their students, but we also know that there is a lot out there that can be learned about equity and about racial equity. We did not have a lot of success with that. I'll just be very honest. And so what we did was we went to the neighboring university, who does a lot of training with equity within their own education department. And we asked for one of our neighboring universities to be a part of that training and to continue our training, but in a different formatting way and a different formatting presentation. And we went back to the drawing board and did a lot more work with that. Our discipline task force continues and has been flourishing. So we found ourselves after implementing MTSS and working with now not only 5 schools, but now into year 3 and 4, we've implemented with several more elementary schools. We found that our discipline had dropped to 5,000 ODRs per year. So we're moving along, and our discipline is really we're beginning to see the fruits of our labor. We're beginning to see our discipline drop significantly, and we're seeing those risk ratios drop in all of our schools. And lo and behold, of course, we were off of that list within 2 years' time, because you have to come off of that list after you have produced positive results for 2 years running. And so wonderful that we were able to come off. During that time, we created our discipline regulation reference guide. What we did was we went to DPI. We use in North Carolina, we use PowerSchool as our database. And so we went to we get this report at the end of every year or at the beginning of every year, a manual, and it's about discipline reporting and how we report back. And so I go to that manual and I look every year at those reportable offenses, those office referrals. For example, I might have one here, 052, UB bullying. Now, what the 052 is it's the code in PowerSchool. And so I went into PowerSchool, I found bullying, I found the code, I looked at the definition. We also looked at the state definition on DPI's website for bullying, what bullying represents, or what is the definition. We made sure that our schools in this column, and again, it's not you can't see it, but hopefully you'll look at it. In the first column, we offer them the definition for it. In the second column, we offer them some solutions or some strategies that they can do that is boots on the ground. If you're a classroom teacher, these are some things that you can offer and do for bullying in your school. And then we offer in the third column, we offer recommendations for principals. So we might say elementary school, and we always break this up between elementary and secondary. So the first offense is just in-school consequence up to 1 day of OSS. We have a bullying report that our principals complete, And if that bullying report finds that there is bullying that has actually taken place, then the student is assigned, obviously a consequence. And so what we do is we give them a range. So at our high school, we say first offense up to 3 days of OSS, second offense up to 5 days of OSS, and third offense up to 10 days. Now, everybody here or listening probably is in administration, and you know that every principal is going to manage these things in a different somewhat of a different way. But what we wanted to be able to do was to offer our principals what we felt was a playbook. And that playbook was for them, which is this discipline regulation reference guide. And it provides them with consequences and sort of a uniform way of handling things. I will tell you now that our principals absolutely love this handbook. Every year I provide our principals and our APs with a survey, and we ask them for their input. What do you like about the handbook? What do you think should be made differently? What do you feel like is something that, you're not, you don't feel like it particularly handles that situation? So as you can imagine, buses are always a big issue for us. So this past year, we had a survey from our principals, and they offered me some feedback about buses and how they would like to see the consequences. We went back, we looked at the data. We said, okay, the bus data for discipline basically supports that. And so we were able to provide them with the change that they requested. This is linked in our board policies, so it's not even a surprise to our parents. We make sure that this link is in our student handbook every year. We make sure it's on our website, and we also make sure that it is in our board policies. It's attached under 4300, our code of conduct. So we make sure that it is very open and very transparent to our parents. There is nothing that we are hiding from them. The other big thing that we did, besides the discipline handbook, besides the discipline disproportionality and the data dives, our school, we have a great guy who can code, and he created what we call our data mart. And so our administrators can go in, and every single day they can look at their data. They can go to their school improvement teams. They can pull their data from last year to this year. They can look at their risk ratios and risk index, and they can say, okay, so this past year, we noticed that all of our discipline, or the bulk of our discipline, happened on buses, in the hallways, and in the classroom. And so they can begin to think about some of the professional development. Sometimes they reach out to our department, and we share resources. We may go out and do presentations for them. And then we make sure that they have all the data that they need, particularly for their school, by going into the data mart and pulling that data. Post-COVID, our discipline has tremendously increased in these last 2 years. And so what are our initiatives now? What are we trying to do to sort of right the ship? We have brought in an individual that we are training all of our school counselors, all our school social workers, all of our school behavioral health specialists, our nurses, and our assistant principals. And they are going back and working with their staff. And what we found this past year when looking at our data was that our classroom management, where the bulk of our discipline was happening, was in the classroom. And we're working on student relationships, what that looks like, how teens' brains develop, how relationships, how we can interact with teens, how to de-escalate situations so that, hopefully better relationships and trust are built with teachers in the classroom. And that what we're hoping is that this is going to make a significant difference in the way that our students see their teachers. That we continue on with the good fight, if I call it that, when it comes to how we deal with discipline in our school district, how we address it from the top down and from the classroom up. And we know that we have to get our teachers to buy into what we're doing, but they have to see the value of that. So that's my story. It's the sort of the down and dirty, gritty, everyday challenge of a school district when it comes to discipline and equity. But I hope that it's something that you can relate to and that you get something out of. So thank you for letting me be here. I appreciate it. I hope you all have a great rest of a session.
Okay, we can go to story number 2. And we have Dr. Carla Curtis, the Director of Special Services, and Mindy Duell, Behavior Services Coordinator from Fayetteville Public Schools in Arkansas. So let's go and let me give you a little bit of background about both of them. Carla Curtis is the Director of Special Services for Fayetteville Public Schools. She received her BSE and MSE and Special Ed Administrator license from the University of Central Arkansas. She is beginning her 33rd year in education, with the majority of her career dedicated to building and overseeing the implementation of quality services for students with disabilities. Mindy Duell, her co-presenter, is currently a Behavior Services Coordinator for the Fayetteville Public Schools. Mindy is an educator by training, receiving her BSc and MSc from the University of Kansas. She is also a board-certified behavior analyst, and she is in her 18th year in public education and has spent her career advocating for students with disabilities and behavior and challenges. Carla and Mindy, we're ready to hear from you.
All right, thank you so much, Donna, and thank you for inviting us. We're excited to share our story of disproportionality within Fayetteville Public Schools and how we were able to overcome that disproportionate representation. And our hopes today in sharing our journey is that maybe others, it will resonate with other people, and that there will be something that we can share that might help you in your current journey of where you are with disproportionate representation. Okay, next slide. To share a little bit about our public school and who we are located in Northwest Arkansas. We have 17 schools within our public school system, 9 elementary schools, 3 middle schools, 2 junior high schools, 1 high school, 1 alternative campus, and 1 virtual academy. Our population is 10,300 roughly. We currently serve 1,425 students with disabilities, roughly. So that equates to about 13.5% of students who are IEP eligible within Fayetteville Public Schools. Our percentage of free and reduced rate is 36%, and we cover 118 square miles. Fayetteville is also located, like I said, in Northwest Arkansas, and the University of Arkansas campus, our campuses actually join. Fayetteville High School joins the University of Arkansas. So we're home of the Bulldogs and home of the Razorbacks. Okay, next slide. So in looking at our disproportionate representation and what got us to this point, our discipline data showed from 2016-17, 2017-18, and 2018-19 that we had a significant difference between the rate of suspension and expulsions exceeding 10 days for students with disabilities compared to general education students. Our data also revealed that we had a significant difference in the rate of suspension expulsions exceeding 10 days within a school year for our African American or Black students with disabilities compared to the general population. So very similar to the national data that Dr. Monk shared earlier was the same thing that we were experiencing. Next slide. So in realizing that data, we began to look at our demographics by race. And if you'll take a look at this slide, this is 4 years worth of data, but you can see pretty consistently our African American population, we're hovering around 10%. Sometimes it's a little bit above and a little bit below. Also, our 2 or more races was at 8.93% this past school year. So just kind of looking at those two categories of those 2 categories by race, and then looking at our white population, we're about 63%, and that's kind of hovered between 63 and 66% over the last 4 years. Next slide, please. So in keeping that in mind, when we compare our district demographics to our out-of-school suspension by race, these two slides should be similar. But what you can see is our African-American population, where we're around 10%, those students are receiving about 30% of our out-of-school suspensions. And then if you'll look at the 2 or more races, where we're about 6% identified in 2 or more, those students are receiving about 12% of the out-of-school suspensions. So just by taking a quick look, you can see some disproportionate representation. Next slide, please. So in receiving that letter from the Arkansas Department of Education, that letter came to me and it also went to our superintendent. We were identified as a school with significant disproportionality, looking back at that 16-17 data through that 18-19 data. So when I received that letter, knowing that my superintendent had received that as well, I began to ask, the question, where do we go from here? This identification is coming through special education, but quickly I felt the weight on my shoulders, but I knew that it wasn't a problem that could be solved through special education. So from that, critical conversations began to happen with upper administration. I began those conversations with the assistant superintendent that I reported to. The conversations went on to our superintendent. And from that, thankfully, there was a lot of support. And so a district support team was developed. And that team consisted of superintendents, executive directors, coordinators, building level administrators, special education staff, and general education staff. So we began to meet, we began to look at the data, and as Tom alluded to earlier, we conducted a root cause analysis and looked at that success gap rubric to determine our cause. And then we began to ask the big question, how did we get here? And so from that, we developed a couple of goals really to guide the work, and we began to push forward. We weren't satisfied with where we were. We knew that it had to be collective responsibility and shared responsibility to get this turned around. And we felt very good that our upper leadership was supporting us. And so we dug in and began the work. Next slide, please. So some of that work, again, was looking at that success gap rubric, really digging down, looking at our data, identifying where we were. We created some surveys where we received some collective input from our building level administrators. They each conducted a self-assessment. We created some collaborative working documents that the team could work on from our different locations across the district. And one of the things that we really wanted to do, we did not want this to feel like it was another layer of something else that our building administrators had to do. So we wanted to look at the situation that we were in. We wanted to look at some of our current practices, our vision and mission, our core values, our strategic plan that already existed. And we really wanted to embed that work into the current things that we were doing to tie it all together and then to begin to turn it around. And we had a team that also attended the disproportionality conference within our state. And at that conference, one of the statements that David Lopez made with WestEd, he was a presenter. He said that disproportionality that lives in special education is often the result of challenges in our general education system. And that resonated with me because that's exactly what I felt when I received that letter. Yes, this identification is coming through special education, but this is not a special education issue. This is a general education or a systems issue. And so that's really the approach that we began to take to turn it. You can't turn it alone. So special ed directors out there, if you're feeling that weight on your shoulders, my belief is that you can't turn this around alone. You need a system of support and you need a team. Next slide, please. So one of the other things that same presenter pointed out is that we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. And so we began to ask ourselves the question, are we living in our own perceptions or in reality as we think about experiences of Black students and other students of color? And so I think this is a great depiction when you look at that. So we had to get our own personal biases out of the way, and we had to really look at our staff as a whole. And within our strategic goals within Fayetteville Public Schools, one of the goals was to hire staff that better represented our student population, because we are mostly a white staff, while, as you saw when you looked at our population by race, we have 10% that are African American. We have a Hispanic population of about 12% within Fayetteville, and then the 2 or more races was about 8, along with Asian and Pacific Islander and others. So we had to recognize that we live in our own perceptions, and we had to change some of that thinking or that mindset. Next slide, please. So in facing the reality, in addition to that root cause analysis, some of our own data within Fayetteville Public Schools indicated that if you were African American or a student of color within our district, that you were 4 times more likely to receive an in-district or an out-of-district suspension compared to white or other ethnic groups. So we really had to face that reality and begin to tackle that problem. Next slide, please. So we developed 2 goals, and our goals were, by the end of the 2020-21 school year, targeted students will utilize learned replacement social skills instead of demonstrating undesirable behavior, as evidenced by an expected reduction of 30% of out-of-school suspensions. And then our second goal was, during the 2020-21 school year, staff in targeted buildings will be trained and begin implementation of restorative practices and utilizing the Boys Town alternatives to suspension, as evidenced by an expected reduction of 30% of out-of-school suspensions. Next slide. So we had a lot of different things that were happening within Fayetteville. We had a lot of good things happening, but we were kind of all over the place. So within that conversation, one of the other things that we began to look at is really trying to create a systemic approach to what we were doing. And so we began to ask ourselves, what is the system? How will it support our students? How can student supports be accessed? So one of the things that came from this identification was, next slide, please, the birthing of our behavior support services structure. And so the purpose of that structure was to broaden the role of our existing behavior specialist, which was Mindy Duell at the time, and she's getting ready to speak. And then also to include the coordination of all of those district behavior supports that we had in place. Buildings were using many different things, but we really wanted to bring all of those pieces together to create a good system of support so that we could address the problem. Okay, at this time, I'll turn it over to Mindy Duell, our BCBA and Behavior Services Coordinator for Fayetteville Public Schools.
Hello, if we'll go ahead and flip to the next slide. One of the key elements from what you heard Dr. Monk and Carla Curtis discuss is that we really looked at this as not just a special education challenge, but a challenge for our entire district. So the very first thing we did in beginning to build that behavior team and services was to try to align student services and special services, so we were supporting all kids and being as preventative as we could when it came to discipline and out of school suspension and office discipline referrals. So if you'll go to that next slide, what we first did was we started looking at each of our tiers and what was in place in each tier, and making sure that we had systems in place, that we were looking at data, and that we were making decisions based on our current reality and the goals that we wanted to get to. If you'll go to that next slide. In Arkansas, just full disclosure, we're still interchanging PBIS and MTSS, but I appreciated that slide Dr. Monk shared that had all of that pieces there for us. With that, in looking at our systems, we knew that we needed to provide training for a lot of our administrators and our teachers. And so we started to look at our district plan for professional development and embedded basic behavior training for teachers. We started to look at data systems and how to drive our decisions with the data that we had. And then looking at all of those components, Carla mentioned Boys Town, we started to use alternatives to suspension and a specialized classroom management model for some of our toughest situations, and then of course functional behavior assessment. So we started to do training with our staff. If you'll go to that next slide. But ultimately, in all those trainings and with what we were doing, we were trying to get to a change in mindset for our staff. And we had a lot of adults who we shared today. We had a meeting today around this very thing and mentioned that when you have just a limited number of tools in your toolkit, you use those tools over and over. And so we wanted to shift our adult mindset to incorporate other alternatives, preventative measures, a continuum of consequences and responses when kids had challenging behavior. Dr. Monk mentioned that behavior is communication. And so part of bringing that mindset into a shift was reminding administrators and teachers that the students were attempting to get some need met, and we wanted to have it be unnecessary, as one administrator said today, to do the outburst behavior, those challenging behaviors, in order to get those needs met. If you'll go ahead and go to the next slide. What this meant, though, as far as directly related to OSS, is we started to ask administrators to notify myself and some other key stakeholders at the second day of OSS for a student. And then we followed up on every student who had received 2 or more days of OSS each time that they received OSS. And it was an opportunity for students to feel heard and for us to listen to the teams and to see if we could put some plans in place. In that process, we started to work alongside ISS, or in-school suspension, and even as students re-entered school following an OSS, to implement what we've repeatedly said: instructive, reflective, and restorative practices. So there was social emotional learning going on in some of that re-entry in ISS. And we also began to equip and empower administrators to use some discretion in assigning number of days. In previous times, equity was seen as doing the exact same thing for each kiddo, and that would keep me from being disproportional. I would be responding with equity, but really doing the same isn't equity. And so trying to work with administrators so that they could see how to use discretion and take context and student need into consideration when they were assigning any kind of punitive or responsive, reactive discipline. Next slide. So like I said, we provided all certified staff with some initial professional development. We started to train in key places on the restorative practices, and you heard both Ms. Curtis and Dr. Monk mention that. And then we developed a school-wide behavioral flow chart. All of these things, getting teacher input, and again, moving from that focus to equity rather than doing what's the same for each child. So not following those rigid disciplinary policies, but really trying to look at needs of a student, past trauma, past experiences, those kinds of things. Next slide. What the place that we received, you can see International Institute of Restorative Practices. And what we know, research shows that if restorative practices, if there's a continuum of discipline in a toolkit, that we have less ISS and less OSS, meaning that we have less of an opportunity to have disproportionality in regards to ISS and OSS. Go to the next slide. So overall, some of those things: equipping our teams, working with those administrators, providing professional development, and following up on each student. We also were building that PBIS MTSS system, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. You can see here in this graph, in 2018, 2019, we had more than 2,300 days of OSS. I'm sorry, we had 2,342 days of OSS assigned. For us, that's the equivalent of 13 years of lost instruction. And so that was, when we put that into frame for our administrators, that was a pretty moving moment for them to go, that's a lot of missed time. What we saw in our data is we also had a lot of students who were repeating OSS. OSS wasn't working for that student. They were getting multiple days of OSS, and it was starting to add up. In the 2019-2020 school year, we did have a reduction. You'll see that second data point is where we ended the year. That was also the year that schools were shut down for COVID in March. So that third data point is if we had stayed on track with our ISS and OSS days, where we would have ended if we'd stayed in school, kind of based on where we were. And overall, we had a 56% reduction in OSS. You can see we would have been at less than 1,000 days of OSS in that year. which is a huge reduction for us. And we were excited. The very first question people asked was, did your ISS assignments go up? And no, there was also, they stayed a little more similar, but there was also a 7% reduction. So we felt good that we weren't just replacing one for the other, and that some of the work we were doing with the ISS to be more restorative was effective in helping kiddos not have a repeated OSS or ISS. Go to the next slide. And here you can see again the reduction by category, by ethnicity and race, the blue all to the orange and grays, where you should keep an eye on. The following year, we had a significant reduction, but that was a year where we were hybrid and back end. So that's hard to look at that data point in the same vein as the 2018, 2019. Go ahead and flip to the next slide. One of the things that was most concerning in some of our data, and I mentioned it before, is we had students who were receiving more than 10 days, and we had students who were getting repeated days. And you can see here, students that receive more than 10 days in general education and special education were disproportionately our African-American students. If you go to the next slide, you'll see I believe the number of students who are receiving 20 or more days of OSS. And again, we're looking at that. For us, that's a half a quarter. And in some of the data, we saw kids who are being suspended 30 and 40 days in a school year, and the lost instruction was concerning. And you can see the disproportionality here. In that next slide, I believe, you'll see that in the 2019-2020, we did not have any students who had, with IEPs, who had more than 10 days of OSS. And you can see our proportionality is starting to come back into frame. We still have some concerns as we go forward. In that next slide, we did have 18 students who were in the general education that did have more than 10 days, but no student across our district received more than 16 days. So overall, a great reduction. And you can see there that some of the reasons were significant. Drugs was a huge factor, but even being able to look at this data and see what some of the root cause for some of those longer days of suspension. In the next slide, if you don't mind to switch, what we are is understanding that we still have a lot of work to do. So in that initial reduction, we felt like it was a huge celebration, but a lot of the feedback we got was we just hadn't reached there. We didn't feel like it was going to be long-term sustainable to have that level of reduction. And we still, even though we had the overall reduction, we're concerned about pockets of places where we had some disproportionality. So we continue to focus on these areas, that preventative PBIS, MTSS, fidelity with all those, and then that alternatives to suspension. And in that next slide, you'll see, I think it's interesting, it's never linear. Success is always, sometimes it feels like a couple steps forward and then a reflection and having to work harder. And so one of the things that's come up for us now is we've started to see that we're continue to be, even though we've had an overall reduction of OSS, even though we have some things in place that I think are make us strong in being able to react to more equity in our schools and discipline. In that next slide, you'll see where we are currently today. So what we have begun to work towards is that focus on OSS. Some of the feedback we got was, even though we needed to have that big focus on the biggest problem, the OSS, students being removed from school, we continue to have disproportionality and see that our students who are African American and our Black students tend to be suspended at higher rates, receive ISS at higher rates. One of the things we looked at in our data is actually that our students who are economically disadvantaged right now make up 71% of our OSS days. For us, this is a huge concern. We have started to look at office discipline referrals. As at that point, if we can reduce our overall office discipline referrals, last year we had 9,734, which is an average of, in our 16 school buildings, 55 a day. Administrators are doing 3 or 4 a day on average, and knowing that that's time they're taking away from supporting teachers. It's also time students are out of the classroom. So we want to now tackle some of that office discipline referrals, and what can we do at the earlier levels to help support students, help support staff. If you'll flip to the next slide, it's just a little bit more of our data. We're trending that the first year of any of our grade bands, so we have elementary, middle, junior high, and high school, and the first year that any time a student enters that new building, we have an increase in rates, and had some good discussion today about what that meant about transitions and about teaching expectations and even maybe being developmentally appropriate. If you'll continue on, you'll see just real quickly that some of our most frequently referred behaviors, and this motivates us, again, looking at the data, to define some of these things by school. What is physical aggression for a kindergartner? How does that get sent to the office versus a 9th or 10th grader? How is insubordination? Look at all those grade levels, and then working to have teachers be equipped to respond, and providing some of that preventative support through our MTSS PBIS framework. If you'll continue, I think this last slide sums up really the areas we want to target, because we know we want to continue to reduce OSS. We want kids in school. We don't want them to be often removed from class. We do think there's a lot of work still in the realm of disproportionality, but we want to deepen the work we're doing, make it more consistent, have more fidelity, and do it at that earlier level. I heard Dr. Monk say prevention is the biggest key. And so having that mindset and making sure that we're being as responsive as we can, as early as we can. Today, we had administrators in for a lunch and learn and talked about the importance of family involvement and family engagement, especially when families may be made up of different stakeholders, different guardians. And so there was good conversation to continue to deepen our work. I think that's all Fayetteville had. We know we have a long way to go, but like that slide said, it's not linear. We're going to keep reflecting and growing in our overall practices.
Wow. Kudos, kudos, kudos. We're going to call you now the dynamic duo of Fayetteville, Arkansas. Great job. Thank you. And it's time for some Q&A for you from our participants. Let's see. You can unmute, and you can also type in the chat. So as people are getting their thoughts together to do that, one of the things that resonated with me as you both spoke was that intentionality. You know, we talked about that from the beginning, the intentionality that Carla talked about. And I know Tom and I are going to talk about some of the takeaways from this session. I was listening to Carla talking about what to focus on and what to measure. You know, with Mindy, I like how you started with that change in the mindset, you know, to get started. So we're waiting to hear from the participants. We're looking at the chat, and don't be shy. You can, okay, great. From Morgan Bridgman from Georgia. What do you think was the impetus for staff administration deciding to prioritize this change? How did you get people on board? Great question.
Honestly, one of the state mandate coming to us was a big catalyst. Just to be honest with you, some of those checks and balances are useful, but Carla stood up in a district leadership meeting and shared what that loss of learning was, and held up that sign that said we had 2,300 days of OSS, which translates to a little more than 13 years of lost instruction. And there were several administrators who had a real moment where they then said, we've got to do some different work. It's not working. So that was powerful, just being able to share the data and talk about it honestly. And Carla did a good job of handling a pretty tough topic that day.
And I do think too, that even though it was more compliance, we had received the letter, we were in significant disproportionality. One of the other things that I said to them is, we should not have to have our Arkansas Department of Education tell us this. We should have already known this, and we should have already been on the road to addressing it, which it was bits and pieces, but I think, you know, true catalyst, unfortunately, if you're given lemons, you make lemonade. So we got the letter, and then we tried to turn it around.
Thank you both for that. Our next question, what is behind districts banning restorative practices? Are you familiar with that? Dr. Monk, if you...
I do not know the answer to that question. I mean, I just will say honestly, there are districts and states across the country banning all kinds of great things right now. So, but I can't give any justification for banning restorative practices. But maybe some of the folks, you know, maybe Carla or Mindy have some awareness of this and what might be behind it.
I think you kind of covered it, Tom, in that response, and a lot of misunderstanding about many of the educational practices that are happening in the country. So communication, I think, is really key to clarify what it is, when we're talking about it. But Carla, Mindy, did you want to add anything before we go to the next question?
I don't really have anything to add, but I think really you have to just look at the data and try to make informed decisions that will create good outcomes for kids. And so rather than, maybe addressing that specific question, just try to draw those conversations back to your data and back to outcomes for kids and benefits for kids.
Right. And that's definitely something that's on my list to share when Tom and I speak. I saw something from Donna Smiley. Do you have a district code of conduct in addition to your FHS restorative practices handbook? If both, how do they work?
So yes, we do. And one of the things that we found when we started in this journey was that our discipline code of conduct, as outlined in our handbooks across our district, was primarily punitive. So our superintendent at the time, in a district leadership retreat, it happened in the summertime, he and our school district attorney together informed our administrators that really the administrator in each building had the authority to look at every situation and all of the factors around a situation, and that yes, we had things outlined in the handbook, but that they had some discretion. And so I think that's really what made the change. And when Mindy shared, she talked about how on day 2 of an OSS, an out of school suspension for any student, that was being reported to a group of people within the district. And then there was some actions that followed up. So every individual student on day 2 of an out of school suspension was getting some involvement within the building and from a district teammate. And so Mindy also talked about those 3 things being reflective, restorative, and just really giving opportunity to kids to reflect on behavior, to restore behavior, and then to provide some instruction. The third component of that was instruction. So just disciplining kids without any instruction, you're going to get the same results. So we were really trying to deepen that with reflection, restoration, and some instruction to go alongside any type of discipline.
That's great. Thank you. We're ready to go on to the second part of that question. What were the specific topics during your lunch and learn with principals?
Yeah, so today we met with principals. We'll follow up with our assistant principals next week, and it was specifically promoting equity in discipline. And so we had lots of conversations and really are trying to, again, look at this from like even at the earlier levels and responding to students at the earliest possible level. So we're not getting to the office, we're not leaving class, we're not being suspended. We looked at it from the framework of 4 components, being preventative in our mindset. So having really strong student-teacher relationships, family engagement, having structured learning environments and high quality instruction. And that's where that MTSS model starts to really help support, is because almost never is it isolated to behavior. We have to look at the whole child, the whole family, the whole structure to really put some things in place. One of the places that we're being reflective is we think we have a long way to go in our family engagement and reaching out to families earlier, getting them involved earlier, asking what's worked for them. And so we just asked our administrators to look at what's going well and what's not going well in those 4 areas. And then how could they lead by example? How could they have some of those conversations back in their building to support those 4 quadrants of how to be more equitable with discipline? And then our charge with the district level is to continue to help support and coach how to get family engagement in early, because it is hard in public schools sometimes if you're a single parent or a grandparent raising a child, or in some other format. We don't always have that same invitation, or like I mentioned before, our data right now is showing that our economically disadvantaged are more likely to be suspended. And so that's hard when you think about leaving jobs and sometimes having 2 and 3 jobs to make ends meet. We asked the question today, who is at an advantage with our current discipline, practices, and data, and who are we disadvantaging, and trying to just deepen the conversation.
Great, Mindy. Thank you so much. So we're going to segue into sharing some of those key takeaways and the strategies that resonated with you as an audience. And you see the Menti again in the chat, and also you can take your screenshot. And Tom and I are going to review some of these together. So let's see what we have, Tom. We see discipline risk ratios are enlightening.
Amen. Thank you. I hope everybody really takes a look at not just discipline risk ratios, but all kinds of risk ratios are useful. Anything that's important to you, graduation rates, test scores. There's a way, I'm really working on ways to use risk ratios to measure all those sorts of things. And the discipline and placement and identification for special ed are the ones required by the significant disproportionality regulation.
Thank you for that. I see that restorative practice. We're going to do a little bit more research on that, and that may be included in some future webinars and products on the website for EXL. So let's look at prevention mindset. This really resonated with me. Yes, it did as well. That was on my list. Analyzing discipline data. Data. We can't emphasize it. I think the dynamic duo emphasize looking at your data, reflecting on it, analyzing it, looking at root causes. Data is just extremely important. That way you look at what you're measuring, monitoring it, and see what's effective and what's not. So what's another one, Tom? Treating each student the same is not equity. We must understand the unique needs of each student, and that's what you heard them talk about as well. Let's see, we don't see things as they are. That was a great slide. As they are, we see them through our own perceptions and perspectives. And that's really important, to align our perspectives and our perceptions of our students, of our work as educators, as we impact our student communities. Let's see another one.
I work for the IDA Data Center. And so, of course, we're very focused on data. But it's so important to recognize that data does not speak for itself. It's just numbers, and how you interpret it makes all the difference in the world. And so I loved that slide too. How do you get that rhinoceros horn out of the picture and really sort of focus on what's really there?
And Tom, someone loved your slide on the tale of two schools. I thought that was well done too. It gives you a realistic way of seeing the impact of using these evidence-based practices. So excellent. When you only have a few tools in your toolkit, you tend to use those tools over and over. That was something else that was resonating. Well, this is great. We're so happy that we're recording this, because all of this information will come back to you as it's sent. We have time to get your feedback on the survey. Link is in the chat. And as you're doing that, thank you about a great webinar. We're getting feedback already, but we have a survey. That's really important for us, because it gives the direction of next steps and the information if it's been impactful. We still have other slides, but we want your feedback at this point. Please take the time before you leave the session with us. Your feedback is extremely important. The center takes everything in to see what your needs are. So if you could do that. Thank you, Lance. Good seeing you there as well. And Morgan, please enter that. We have lots of resources in this presentation. You see the different links that have been put together for you. And if we go to the next slide, Carrie, so that you see the website, the eac.southern.education.org, and email EAC. And make sure that you fill out those surveys, because that is extremely important for our accountability as well. great. And it is 3:45. Have a wonderful rest of the year, everyone. It was wonderful seeing you.